So with this podcast, this is the first episode that I'm recording. I kind of want to give it a mission statement. And that mission statement is that I'm going to talk about what I want for however long I want to talk about it. And if you want to listen, you can. That, I think, is an integral statement you can make about any podcast, especially those that deal with current events, and maybe those that editorialize things. I'm not going to editorialize as much as some other podcasts or some other media publications do. I don't see myself as some big-time media publication. In the first place, I just know that to be true. But I want to give a unique voice to discussions. Right, myself, I'm young. I'm in my early 20s. Most people my age would probably be a bit more left of center. I see myself as a moderate, a centrist, with some very pro-liberty views, and for that reason, I want to uphold those things. Now, it may seem as if, through some of the topics I'm going to cover and some of the views I'm going to take, that I seem like some far-right personality. That's simply not true. What I really am is someone who sees both sides of the argument, and I'm going to walk myself through my decision-making process in my head, usually without talking out loud like I am now, to form an opinion on a matter. This podcast is going to be the opposite of that. I'm going to put out my thoughts as I'm making up my decision. And that brings us to our first story today. Last night, CBS, on their flagship evening weekend news program, 60 Minutes, that is. If it wasn't already obvious, I'm going to be talking about the Stormy Daniels interview. Stormy Daniels is a former porn star. I'll be nice and say she's a former adult actress. That's the most roundabout way of saying she sucks dick and takes dick in the ass and the vagina on camera. But whatever, I'll give the lady her due and say she's a porn star. Anyway, the allegations that she made about an alleged affair, as most allegations are alleged, she made allegations about some sexual activities, about an affair with now current President Donald J. Trump, and the affair is detailed to have occurred over 10 years ago. The best estimate I keep hearing is 12 years ago. It's sort of been in 2006. And last night she was on 60 Minutes with being interviewed, and it went in a weird place, I'll say. And I have to kind of brace my words with what I really want to say, because I don't want to turn this into, and by this I mean this podcast, me talking. I don't want to turn it into a rant and a rave, which is what a lot of other people have done. And I've seen this all over the internet. I've seen it on the 24-hour news cycle. People have had some very unique reactions to this. My first point that I want to make is that it's 60 Minutes. That is the name of the program. It's 60 Minutes with commercials. It's closer by my estimates, because I've estimated it and all that shit. It's much closer to 45 minutes, which is usually an American program that's allotted for 60 minutes is 45 plus 15 of commercials. It varies sometimes. So the interview itself, I measured for 27 minutes and some seconds. Really, though, if reading the transcript, it plays out that the interview itself seemed to be stretched out 5 times as long as it actually took. The transcript, it's a 5-minute conversation, really. If you take out all of the repetitiveness and what I like to call the sports editing, there's not a lot of new information that was really presented. And I'm of the opinion that this isn't news, right? I don't see why people care about what someone did. that long before they assumed office. Now, this isn't a situation where in the 80s and 90s you had the Clintons with their dealings, Whitewater, the realty scandals, all of those things, right? And that is during and after, I should say, Bill Clinton being first the Attorney General and later the Governor of Arkansas. I think we can differentiate issues wherein a politician, right? We're dealing with politicians here. We're talking about politicians here. A politician who is in office and then does something and then is in another office. I think what happens in between the holding of those two offices can easily be critiqued, can easily be condemned if it's immoral or illegal. I think things that are immoral deserve to have a voice. They deserve to have some impact on what people think when they go to the polls. But Donald Trump has never held office prior to being the president. If he cheated on his wife, okay, he cheated on his wife. If his wife was okay with him sleeping around, okay, his wife, Melania, was okay with him sleeping around. What we cannot come here and say is that it is wrong to sleep around. It is wrong to sleep around, but it is not wrong to sleep around if your partner is okay with you sleeping around. And I want to go back to my previous point. Donald Trump has never held office prior to being the president. I already said that. And Bill Clinton was the Attorney General and the Governor of Arkansas prior to becoming President of the United States. He was elected in 1992 and assumed office in 1993. This is Clinton that we're talking about. Those dealings, financial dealings, issues like that, those deserve to be talked about. In fact, they were talked about. Whitewater was hanging over Clinton's head through most of his presidency once it was discovered, if I recall correctly. And, of course, we have the gloomy cloud that's hanging over the Trump administration of the Russian collusion, the Russian scandal. Now, the thing about that is it's such a complex issue. When you say Russia, the Russia issue, there's about 3 or 4 different incidents and scandals in there because there's people on both sides that are affected. I'm not going to sit here and say it was all the Democrats. I'm also not going to sit here and say it was all the Republicans. There was interference on both sides. If it had an effect, the jury's hung on that one. I'm not going to say the jury's still out. They're hung. They're hung on that one. So I guess I should get back to my point about Stormy Daniels. And that is, it's a bunch of nothingness. She was also on Kimmel prior to the 60 Minutes interview. Not directly prior, but as she's been going through the news cycle being all of the different publications and the different interviews, appearances with the different networks, both cable, broadcast. If she appears on Bill Maher, premium as well, I guess. He's about the only liberal that I think a lot of conservatives can stand because at least he's intelligent. And that's not me speaking, that's me paraphrasing the statements of other conservatives. So I think there's a lot of manufactured outrage with the Stormy Daniels issue. You know, it's, like I say, it's a whole lot of nothing, really. If Trump did something wrong, it's not sleeping around with a porn star. That is, I would argue, to be expected of someone who was a billionaire real estate developer in Manhattan from the late 70s, early 80s, all the way until he assumed the most powerful office in the country, arguably the world. I think the outrage that I even have as someone who supports the president is that he wasn't transparent about it. You know, we have this NDA in place that people are referring to as it was not Donald Trump, but it totally was because it kind of was Donald Trump, it kind of wasn't. And that's the weird thing about NDAs, right? You can't even acknowledge that they exist, right? That is why we have, you know, the canary, if you understand that concept, the canary, the warrant canary. Most websites, when they're issued subpoenas for user data, they're also put under a gag order, and they can't tell anybody that they have been served with a subpoena to relay customer or user data. Instead, they would remove a statement on their website somewhere about how we have never been contacted by law enforcement in relation to user data. All right, if that statement is on the website one day and then all of a sudden is not on the website, that's a conscious effort by that website to communicate we have been subpoenaed for something. And it might, in most cases, it might not be that all user data has been collected by the federal government. It may just be that one user was targeted for some, strangely enough, small issue, some small thing that involved a Reddit comment or a Facebook comment or a tweet. But it is an ingenious maneuver, the warrant canary. And I'll get back to that in a minute. So, if you saw the Stormy Daniels interview on Kimmel, she was asked, is there an NDA? Did you sign this? She's like, I don't know. And I think that is more funny than it is terrifying. I think it's slightly terrifying because I do not think, and in fact, as it turns out legally, a person cannot be coerced into signing a contract. Additionally, a person cannot sign a contract that waives their constitutional rights. And there is some degree to truth in that people can, but that it's in very limited circumstances, and that's something I'm not going to really get into because that gets into a whole legal mess, and that involves students, schools. Students waive some degree of the expression of their rights while also maintaining them. That's a whole legally murky existence that I don't want to be in. And so for now, we will just make the assumption you can't sign away your rights. But somehow an NDA between private parties, right? Between private parties, this being, in this case, it would have been between the Trump company and Stormy Daniels. Her real name, which escapes me, considering she is a porn star, that's her stage name. It's the name that everyone is calling her. I've seen a few publications that have put her real name, which is not something she's trying to hide. It's simply, that's how people know her because that's how the news broke. And oftentimes the name someone has when the news breaks is often the name that they retain. And so, I think it is a little bit scummy that the president tried to hide all of this. At the time, he wasn't president. At the time, he was just Donald Trump, billionaire real estate developer. Yet still, it's not something I would do if I were a billionaire. I'd really like to be a billionaire. But, you win some, you lose some. And I think that is how I conclude this story. Is that in this 24-hour news media cycle, all these things come up. How they turn out, well, we never really know. So this is going to be something that I'm going to continue to keep track of. But I'm really interested in seeing how the Stormy Daniels saga turns out, how it concludes. A little parental advisory, content warning before I jump into this next story. It contains frank discussion of heinous crimes. So in February of 2017, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement was involved in making an undercover sex sting wherein they netted 12 men who were attempting to meet underage children online. Obviously, that's a horrible crime. One of those men was a former deputy general counsel for Florida State University. And that man, who is Dayton Michael Kramer, faces a prison term of anywhere from 10 years to life, and he is being charged in federal court. So let's back up a little bit. Kramer is a retired U.S. Army colonel. He has been the chief legal counsel at West Point, a senior law clerk to former U.S. District Judge Charles R. Ritchie, who, by the way, if any of you care about politics, also adjudicated the Watergate civil trial. Now, I want to pause for a moment and step back and look at something from the bigger picture. So, out of Wisconsin, a man attempted to sell his daughter for sex. And you may ask, how are these two related other than them both being heinous crimes that involve children? One imaginary, the other all too real. That's the child, obviously. But I'll get to that. So Andrew James Turley was sentenced to 60 years in prison. This is in Texas. He is originally from Wisconsin, and he was convicted of trafficking a child and compelling prostitution of someone under the age of 18. This sentence originates from a late 2015 incident whereby Turley, as I've already said, attempted to sell his daughter. And you may still be asking where I'm going with this. I promise. I'm going to quit quelling your fears, and I'm going to get directly to the point. So, you have this man, Turley. He attempts to sell his daughter for $1,000 for 2 hours. Now, unknown to him, of course, the prospective client, was an undercover police officer. The undercover officer showed up at his house, or his apartment, I should say, where the child was living with the mother. Turley was in Houston to visit with his daughter. He still lived in Wisconsin at that time. And actually, when they found the child, she was unresponsive and lying naked under a blanket. The mother had no idea. In fact, it's not too often that you get prosecutors that speak out about the emotional side of a case. They try and not get too media apparent. They try and not appear too much in the media because it can backfire on them. This case broke my heart. That's the quote from one of the ADAs, the assistant district attorneys who prosecuted the case. A father is supposed to be a protector, not a predator. So, I think that's a horrible crime. That father attempted to sell his daughter for sex. I don't think anybody is going to argue that. Now, back to the Florida story. So, FDLE, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, they encroached, in my opinion, a bit, actually. So the facts of the case, the persona that they used in this case is one that we've seen recently. For people who follow these, what I like just to colloquially call the To Catch a Predator stings, they're not the To Catch a Predator stings anymore. In fact, very rarely are we seeing people who read the arrest reports and the press releases and the briefs. You're not seeing a case made wherein a undercover detective takes upon the persona of an underage child and then sits in waiting for adults to contact them and send obscene communications. That is not as common as what we are now seeing. So FDLE, in collaboration with the Department of Homeland Security, for some reason, I'm still trying to figure out why the Department of Homeland Security was involved in this. They had this sting, and here are the facts of the sting. Here is a bit of a brief on how the sting was conducted and what the situation and the scenario that FDLE created was. The undercover investigators of both state and federal agencies, including more than the Department of Homeland Security, as it turns out, took on the persona of an adult. Usually, the scenario that we often see when you read the arrest reports are this. The detective assumed the identity of the mother of a child who was, insert age here. 13, 14, whatever. So here's, and you may already be guessing the point I'm about to make. Police, law enforcement, I should say, are allowed to make up a fictitious child. And the way that the law in many states, as well as at the federal level, reads, is that it is illegal to send obscene messages, obscene communications to a person, a minor, or who is believed to be a minor. Therefore, that's why it's perfectly fine for law enforcement to make up a fake kid, right? And the talking alone is the crime, right? It is an additional crime to then, after sending an obscene communication, to go and meet the believed to be real child. In the case of the Wisconsin man, the child was real, he committed a crime, he's going away for 60 years. In the case of this FSU lawyer, who was caught up in a sex sting, trying to meet a child for sex, let's concede he was trying to do that, the fictitious child, and the fictitious, you see, undercover, the fictitious mother, I'm doing little air quotes, if that is all fake, right? If there's no child and the person, the suspect, the target, the criminal, whatever title you give them, is talking to an adult who then brings up the fact that they have a child, somehow because the mother isn't really a mother of a child, it's not illegal. It's not illegal what this law enforcement personnel is doing. The point I'm trying to make here is, somehow, that is the trend. We've seen less of law enforcement pretending to be, or I should use the term, assuming the identity or assuming the persona of an undercover child. That's not happening as much anymore as the adult persona is identifying themselves and saying, oh, hey, I have this daughter. And my favorite part is that oftentimes, to even create plausibility that this is a real thing, it's a real thing, I promise, it's totally not law enforcement. The law enforcement official will say things along the lines of, I'm 30 years old, I'm a lesbian, I have a teenage daughter that is curious about things I'm not going to be able to help her with. I'm in a committed relationship with my girlfriend and partner, and she's out of town for a couple weeks. Couple points there. We've just had a member of law enforcement say, I'm an adult. Do you want to have sex with a kid? There's no other third party that you can communicate with to prove that I'm real, right? And I'm reading this from a specific arrest report that I have up on my screen. And I'm paraphrasing it because I'm not reading it exactly. I'm paraphrasing the amalgamation of 20 different arrest reports I was able to find this morning when I decided to cover this story. If it's a cop and they make an offer to another adult, hey, do you want to have sex with this kid? It's the adult who's not the cop who's going to get busted. As he should, right? It's not good to meet children for sex. That's horrible. That's not good. That's bad. Roughly speaking, you don't want to be on the wrong side of the law, roughly speaking. But somehow, if an adult who is not a cop says, hey, do you want to have sex with this kid? It's the adult who offered, because they're not a cop who's getting sent away for 60 years. And I have no sympathy for that man, for Turley, the guy I covered who's from Wisconsin. I just find a little bit of strange double standardness because, well, who's to say what is believable, right? Because the way the language reads at both the state and the federal level, I just want to reiterate that, is that a person who reasonably believes that they're talking to a minor is committing a crime when they send an obscene communication. It really, to me, harkens back, you're going to laugh probably when I say this, it harkens back to the New York City cannibal cop case, right? The New York City cannibal cop, he never had any intention of slicing up women, raping them, eating them after slicing them up, obviously. He was convicted, and his conviction was appealed, and it was thrown out because he never had any intention. He was purely role-playing, right? And that was a First Amendment thing. Of course, in regards to the underage sex stings, it is purely the crime to be talking to an undercover child. I'm not saying that should not be a law. In fact, that should be a law. We need to protect our children. Instead, I think what needs to be addressed is this issue of law enforcement targeting people, enticing people, and themselves only being able to commit and say the things they can say because they have a badge, right? Now, who is to say that a person does not go out there tomorrow, do exactly what this law enforcement agency, what FDLE, and other agencies do? across the country at both the local, state, and federal level do. And they're attempting to entice a predator. And it turns out that predator is just a member of law enforcement who is fulfilling the role of the law enforcement agency in the Turley story, right? In other words, right, law enforcement has this free pass to enforce the law, which is good, right? They should be able to do that. The issue I see is, what if Turley didn't have an actual child, right? What if Turley was purely role-playing, like the Cannibal Cop in New York City, like I brought it up, right? You know, Cannibal Cop, appeal gets filed, sentence gets appealed, conviction gets thrown out on First Amendment grounds. If Turley had not had a child, had not had an actual child there, right? Would he be covered in the same way that the Cannibal Cop was? Right? Is it that point, because the crime that Turley committed was trying to sell his kid for sex? But what if there's no kid? What if he is purely role playing with another adult, and that is what is getting his rocks off just enough so he does not go out and commit an actual crime against a child? That's a whole nother issue, mind be it, how to treat pedophiles, how to treat that mental disorder. I'm not talking about predators, right? Predators are people, they're the ones who go out and they commit a crime and they are pedophiles. There are people who, their brain chemistry, that makeup, it's still disgusting as society, but I think if a person admits how they feel and they seek treatment, you don't call them a criminal, right? We don't believe in thought crimes here in the United States. At least we haven't before. And that is the issue I find, right? That one of these days, law enforcement is going to mess up, right? They're going to pursue someone like they pursued Turley, and there's not going to be a child, right? There's not going to be a child. They're going to break into the house. They're going to say, "Where's the kid?" The dude's going to say, "What kid?" Right? And that's going to put in light, under a new light, I should say, the ethics, the morality, the legality of the actions that law enforcement takes. Now, I happen to know quite a bit about how these function because, of course, I read the arrest reports, I follow the cases, because I do think, right, that people who are traveling to meet children for sex, that's a horrible crime. But I think here in the United States, we have gotten to such a level of moral panic and moral outrage that the moment that it creeps, and all of a sudden, law enforcement, with entirely good faith and good meaning, encroach upon someone's rights, and then they still try and pursue a case, right? So the way that this functions, right, is the Department of Justice has a program, and it organizes under task force state, local, federal agencies, as well as prosecutorial authorities at both the state and the federal level, to conduct operations like this, to commit undercover stings. However, one of the issues is this: they also fund training. So what happens when the training isn't enough, right? What happens when it goes bad? I don't want to see us as a country have this reckoning where, because there was an overzealous or an unprepared or a encroaching act by law enforcement, that the courts then completely gut and neuter the ability for law enforcement to conduct these operations. As someone who's very familiar with the internet, I can tell you that without some of these tools, these people, these predators, well, they'd be getting away. And we just don't want that. We don't want people to get away. As of now, there probably are not, in general, any rights being violated. As someone who has pretended to be someone else on the internet, allegedly, I can tell you how easy it would be to make one of these cases the way law enforcement do. As someone who's somewhat familiar with the law, it would be very easy to take the photos of a person, someone you don't know even. Take a young model who's over the age of 18, use them to create a profile, and then basically catch pedophiles. Catch predators, right? Oftentimes the terms, like I said, are used interchangeably, and they are true. Someone who's going to meet a child for sex is both a pedophile and a predator. But how easy it is, combined with how stupid the predators are, usually, right? Like, somehow a lawyer was caught up in that, so I'm trying to think, you have to wonder. There's sometimes said that there's 3 groups for the people that get caught up in those investigations. There are the heavy hitters, the people who would be doing it anyway without the internet. There are the people who may have the predisposition or the predilection to commit an act like that. And then there are the hard, heavy, not so much heavy hitters, but the people who know what they're doing is wrong. They get enticed to do it, and they don't consider the consequences. I think it's that third group, that people who are against these stings being conducted they're often using that third party, that third group, when they're waving their flag of this should not be happening, right? Police should not be doing this. I do not agree with that. If law enforcement was unable to use internet resources, use cybercrime units, use all of the tools that, by the way, most of them are available to the general public, but law enforcement is using them, obviously, in a certain and particular way. If law enforcement couldn't do that, if they couldn't catch that last group of the people who get enticed into doing it, they wouldn't be catching the heavy hitters who would. And now I'm very much a person who's going to say, never give up liberty for a little bit of security. But I think what we have to understand is that oftentimes the courts are not condemning that third group as much as they are the first 2, right? I think the hard, heavy hitters, those are the people who are already registered sexual offenders and predators who are attempting to meet children for sex, and they would be doing it without the internet. The internet only makes it easier. I have an issue with how we have these 2 juxtaposed cases who hit the media at about the same time, and the vastly different outcomes. Now, of course, the one here in Florida, that was actually charged in the Northern District, the United States District Court for the Northern District of Florida, which is, it's federal law versus state law, state law in Texas of all kinds. But you look at the methods, and be it state or federal, there's no difference. And so, to reiterate, to sum up, to conclude this bit, yeah, there's an issue with the methods, yeah, but not with the faith of it. So I hope that makes sense, right? That somehow we have the 2 sides. We have the 2 sides of an illicit and a heinous exchange. And like I said, I'm curious about that hypothetical, right? What is going to happen when someone is role-playing that they have a daughter, that they have a child, I guess, in general, and then they get arrested over it, right? My fear is that, like I said, in the sloppiness, it neuters law enforcement's ability to catch those heavy hitters. And with that, that's the end of our story. It's the end of my core analysis for this. And our next story is, well, something a bit more different. So I saw this news over the weekend that Netflix had been banned from competing at the Cannes Film Festival. The reason being that Netflix refuses to release its films, and instead they distribute them, they debut on the streaming service, the Netflix originals, and that's even without factoring in that some of the Netflix originals, the way it's defined, are actually small pieces from other countries that just had never been distributed in the United States, and so therefore in the US, shows can get called Netflix originals. But that's for television shows. That's for miniseries or short form or limited series. Now, a lot of people were trashing Cannes, saying they were trying to stick to some old way of thinking, some old way of the industry. And it does go back to the industry, of course, but we have to remember something. Cannes does not want to give competition spots to films that are coming from a company that aren't helping the industry. They're changing the industry. They're indirectly fighting Cannes, the Cannes Film Festival. And so I understand why Cannes is doing that. And a lot of people don't. And it just kind of infuriates me. It's kind of just stupid. And I'm not infuriated by this specific example. More, I'm infuriated by the stupidity of people, by them not looking into an issue. And that is my mini rant for this episode, I guess. I guess to sum up the Cannes issue, I don't see why Netflix should take away a competition spot from these other films, right? Cannes it's that pinnacle. It's what people want to get to. It's a big thing. And so for Netflix, who can kind of just pump out picture after picture after picture, I can understand why that's a bit, I don't want to say cheating, right? Cheating isn't really a good way to put it, but I think instead maybe Netflix should stream its own film festival. I think that would be a way for them, that would be another way for Netflix to highlight independent creators. Netflix already has a huge user base. So much like how some companies put out the pilot seasons where they release pilots, Amazon does that, right? Amazon has their Amazon originals, their Prime originals, where they'll put out all the pilots, see how they do, and that's one step in the decision process of if Amazon orders the entire season, orders a season, or orders, of any length, or miniseries. And I think Netflix has a huge user base. They could do something similar with an independent film awards. And I think Netflix is a legitimate enough company that a film that wins a Netflix award, that would be something they put on the box, or they put on in the details, or the product description, or the listing. So I don't really see this as an issue. I see it more of a clarification. Cannes is saying these are our eligibility requirements to compete in competition. Netflix is not going to qualify for this because they don't fit these eligibilities, or they're not a distributor that pays into our system, right? So if Netflix wants to turn around and they want to make their own shit, they can go ahead and fucking make their own shit, not to be too graphic, but I see this as a good thing for Netflix. I see this sort of being pushed out of one area of the film industry, right? That gives Netflix room to build their castle, in their area of the sand on the beach. And I think it's a good thing. And with that, I think I'm going to wrap up this first episode. I really enjoyed getting to speak my mind for, a little over 45 minutes, getting to talk about how I felt about a couple stories, getting to get those things off of my chest. So with that, I want to say thank you and have a wonderful day.